I won't run from the crushing. I'll hold on through the pain. What I lose means nothing next to what I gain. Come tear down every idol so this heart won't stray. Don't let me stray. I just wanna be your sanctuary, a dwelling place for grace and mercy. Keep sifting me till.
And good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Threshing Floor. We are here on lamnetwork.tv, where you are getting all kinds of tremendous programming that's actually going to be good for you as opposed to what you're getting elsewhere. My name is Darryl Weinberg. Leonie Johnson, my partner, is she's got a medical issue to deal with a family member. So she said she might or might not make it. We're not sure. Keep her in prayer on that. This morning, though, I have the distinct pleasure of introducing someone I just met recently. We did an interview a couple weeks ago on Barry Bussey's First Freedoms regarding the whole Israel situation. And as Tom and I got to talking, we realized that there's a whole bunch of other things that we have in common. And so I would like to bring to the show a warm welcome to Tom Marazzo. Good morning, Tom.
Thanks, Darryl. Thanks for inviting me to your show, and thanks to all your guests for watching.
Yes, it's very exciting. So many Canadians will probably be aware of you because you had quite a prominent role within the Freedom Convoy a couple of years ago. Why don't you talk to us a bit about that?
Yeah, so I did participate. I wasn't one of the original people who came up with the idea, and I wasn't on the planning team originally. But 2 days after the convoy had arrived to Ottawa, a member of an organization called Canada Unity, a couple of members reached out to me and said, "Hey, we'd like a little bit of advice because I was a 25-year veteran of the Canadian Army." And so they thought maybe we can reach out to this guy and get some advice on some logistic matters. And so that's basically how I found myself from 3 hours after that phone call, standing in the middle of the convoy itself. And originally, I didn't mean to take on a prominent role of any kind. I just thought I would go and help. But the more time that I spent at the convoy, the more my role started to evolve. And so week to week to week of the 3 weeks that I was there, there was major differences in what was happening each week. And so, you may have seen me probably around the second week to the third week doing some of the media, social media, but it was really never my intention to appear in front of a camera. And perhaps if I didn't, I wouldn't be getting sued for $290 million right now. I'm not the only one. There's a lot of, I think there's approximately 40 of us that are being sued. And a great guy from Niagara, there's a couple guys from Niagara, which is where I'm originally from. I was born and raised in Niagara Falls. The Jonker family and friends are also named on the lawsuit as well. And it's a couple of residents of Ottawa and Happy Goat Coffee Company and some other people, and a federal employee who has taken it upon themselves to file a class action lawsuit against us for $290 million for the traumas they've suffered from hearing the honking of horns. So I guess they're experiencing phantom honking and microaggressions, all this time after, and have decided to sue us for honking of horns for the tune of $290 million. This was the last time I've heard. I've heard it was between 300 and 400 million, but the last number I heard was 290, which was reported in the media.
Oh, well,
So
at least they've dropped it a little.
exactly. Yeah, we could pick our teeth with $1 million here and there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. So, out of that, you wrote a book,
I did. I
and
did. Yeah, I've got a copy here. This book here. It's called The People's Emergencies Act. And I got the name of the book from a friend of mine who participated in Windsor. And he's a fellow veteran who
Mhm,
was at the protest in Windsor and was arrested and charged in Windsor.
mhm,
And we were talking a few years ago after the convoy and after Windsor when it was all over, and he said, the convoy, Windsor, Coots, all of these mass strikes. I prefer to think of them as a strike as opposed to a protest. Uh,
mhm.
were you know the people of Canada's Emergency Act, and so I thought that's a great name for a book. And so,
Mhm.
thanks to my friend Sammy, I that's what I named it.
And what kind of response have you had from the book so far?
Generally, like the ratings, it's difficult because for some reason people are very reluctant to rate products, and I understand that. But I go on and I try to read some of the comments on Amazon because I sell it on Amazon, and the comments are pretty straight or pretty supportive. I think I'm a 4.7 out of 5. So I think that's pretty good. I'm quite happy to read a lot of the comments. I go through all of them, even the bad ones, which you can tell are they're not real purchasers, and they're just people out there that hated the convoy. Those are pretty obvious. But yeah, I think the response has been really good.
Good. So, how has the your experience with the convoy, kind of on a macro level, how do you think the convoy has changed Canada?
That's such a difficult question to answer. Um, I think it created awakening and a bond between Canadians because the expressed intent of the COVID-19 responses by the government was to isolate us, to make sure that we could not come together as a community.
Right.
They put mandates and legislation in place to deliberately prohibit us from coming together. So the
Mhm,
intent is to isolate you. And so when we got to the convoy, it defeated that entire intent, that entire purpose from every level of government to isolate us. The people stood up and said, "No, absolutely not. We are free people with what we believe are God-given inalienable rights, and so we are going to come together, and we are going to exercise our charter rights to peacefully assemble." And so it broke really the government's attempt to isolate us.
mhm,
So that was the most positive thing is millions of Canadians came together, whether you went to Ottawa or Coots or Windsor or any other place. We came together, and
mhm.
we didn't feel alone and isolated anymore. However, almost 3 years, because we're November now. It'll be 3 years at the end of January of the convoy,
Yeah.
and we have the same exact government in place at every
Mhm,
level. We have the Ford government in place. We have British Columbia in place. We have every government in place except for New Brunswick just changed their provincial government, and they elected a liberal government in New Brunswick. And so, Saskatchewan just had an election a few days ago, and they again elected their domestic abuser throughout the pandemic. And
mhm.
so, I'm looking at all this. What has changed for Canada overall? I'm not sure much has changed for Canada other than there are no mandates, and I do believe that's largely in part because of the Freedom Convoy at Coots and other protests. Had those events not happened,
Right.
I believe we would all be suffering, not only mandatory boosters, but we would already be full swing in CBDCs and 15-minute cities.
Mhm.
So it's a tough question. It's a very complicated question because, I want to see proof of change, not sort of platitudes of change.
Right.
On the political front, we're not seeing any change, any discussion whatsoever of accountability.
Mhm.
And in my view, this country will never heal until we first see accountability demonstrated. And that's a very difficult thing because the government doesn't want to admit that they were wrong.
Well, and when they control all the levers of power with the
Mhm,
media, with the judicial system, with the law enforcement system,
mhm,
it makes it very challenging. I mean, this is, I think, one of the main objectives of the whole COVID thing was to teach us learned helplessness,
mhm, mhm,
and that was, a very big response or a very big tactic that the Trudeau government was using through the whole trucker convoy. That when they brought in the UN troops and you were just a few meters away from
mhm,
the disabled lady who got trampled by the horse.
mhm.
And
Candace.
yeah, and there was nothing that really, I mean, the native tribes, they were, talking tough and everything else, and nothing happened out of that.
Yeah,
The only thing that really happened was Trudeau got divorced. So I'm not
yeah.
sure what the connection is there with that, but he still believes in everything that he's doing. So this whole learned helplessness thing, and that's a very big element, I think, of Canadian culture. And
Mhm.
it's something that we desperately need to change because people who submit like that die very quickly when tyranny comes.
Yes. Yes, they do.
And my wife, having come from Eastern Europe, she lived under communism.
Mhm,
She left when she was 15 years old back in 1991 after the wall fell,
mhm,
and she remembers what it was like.
mhm.
The problem, though, now is that she said the one thing that held us all together was the strong family unit, but the government has done such a marvelous job of destroying that now with all the craziness that's going on and the confusion that's being put within the kids and everything else. You don't have strong family units anymore. And it's impossible to survive what's going to come without having communities of people to be able to rely on, first with the family and then with your tribe.
Mhm. Well, anyone just needs to look right now at the Communist Manifesto. If you look at Marxist ideology, and you will just see over time, over history, since this ideology has taken foot in any country in the world, you see the destruction of those societies who've ushered in those that ideology or those principles into practice. You're seeing millions upon millions of people who have been murdered. And I've always said this. I've said this for quite some time. The greatest mass murders in human history have always been the governments of the very people that were supposed to protect them. Were
Mhm.
actually the ones who killed most of their citizens. And the greatest example really does come from Russia and China. Under Mao, under Stalin. These are Marxist ideology, and
Mhm.
they are responsible for the greatest number of deaths in human history. And I mean, almost on an industrial scale, the amount of people that have been killed by these ideologies.
Mhm.
And so a core fundamental principle of Marxism is to destroy the family unit, is
Yeah.
to destroy individuality. But ironically, one of the ways they do this is to systematically divide everybody into several different categories. You belong to this category, this category, this category. And so it breaks the bonds of the family. It
Yeah.
breaks the bonds of the church. It breaks the bonds of your community,
Mhm.
where isolation and really this learned dependence on the state is is a very dangerous thing for all of us. And so when we see things like this happening in our country, and we look at wokeism and we look at all these other different things happening, the family bonds are being torn apart, and people
Mhm.
don't necessarily understand why they're even in favor of certain things, but yet they are, because they're under this hypnotic psychosis from the anchor man.
Mhm.
Um, and it's really it's devastating, because I had noticed during the pandemic, the anchor man is somebody that has no idea who any member of their audience is, but everybody knows the anchor man. And so whatever comes out of that idiot box, whatever the anchor man tells you, is given much more weight and value by people than their own flesh and blood family members. And if you don't believe this, just look around and see what happened during the pandemic when fathers and mothers turned on their children who didn't want to get vaccinated. Children turned on their parents. Yeah, children turned on their siblings. Aunts and uncles turned on their nieces and nephews.
Mhm.
Best friends, relationships, 30, 40, 50-year relationships were destroyed. Coworker relationships were destroyed
Yeah.
because people chose to listen to the fear mongering and the panic that was coming from the anchor man, and didn't want to use critical thought and didn't trust their own family members. So, think about how effective that is to this stranger, this no name stranger who doesn't know who you are. You put more trust in them than your own father or your own mother or your own child. It's a sad state of affairs when they have that type of grip on people.
Well, and Yeshua said that a house divided against itself cannot stand.
Mm.
And so one of the main tactics of the devil is divide and conquer, and he has done
Yes.
it masterfully. And
Mhm.
look what we're being divided on: vaxxed and unvaxxed, male and female, black and white,
Yes.
French and English. It's Serbian and Croatian. Wherever you are, there's division, and they're artificial. One of the
Yes.
things that I talk about in my book, when I did the chapter on anti-Semitism, I said when a bunch of kids get together in the playground, they don't care what color you are. Those
Mhm.
those are artificial. Racism and prejudice are learned behaviors.
Mhm.
We all realize
Absolutely.
instinctively that we're human, and it doesn't matter. We all bleed the same way. We all, eat the same way. We all sleep the same way. So these artificial divides are bred into us through the propaganda arm of the people who want to control us. And the easiest
Mhm.
way to control us is to keep us fighting against each other as opposed to fighting against them.
Mhm.
Because if we all turned around one day and every Canadian, and I've said this, I don't know how many dozens of times, if every Pastor Art Pawlowski should not be famous today, because
Mhm.
every pastor in Canada should have stood up and said, hell no, we're not going to shut our churches down. You have no right
Mhm.
to tell. The whole thing would have disappeared right then and there.
Yeah.
Trudeau would have been the emperor with no clothes at that point.
Mhm. And I've spoken to Arthur Pawlowski numerous times, and he's admitted the exact same thing you said. He doesn't want to be thanked. He doesn't deserve to be thanked. He feels that he did what needed to be done, and that doesn't require or command any sort of thank you. It's that all people should have done it, and they
Yeah.
chose not to.
Yeah.
So,
Well, and biblically, we see the same thing. We've got Mordecai refusing to bow down to Haman in the book of Esther. We've
mm,
got Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, who refused to bow down to Nebuchadnezzar, got themselves thrown into the fiery furnace. You've got Daniel refusing not to pray, and he got thrown into the lion's den. But the reason why those examples are famous, Joseph, the same thing. He refused to sleep with Potiphar's wife when she was, trying to seduce him, and he ended up getting thrown in jail. When you do the right thing, you are an anomaly, and it's easy to make an example out of you. Art was telling us when we were at the Freedom Convoy or the Great Canadian Awakening Conference
mhm,
last year. We had dinner with him, and he was explaining his experience in jail, and I mean the abuse that he took, the beatings. One of the prisoners who was helping him, he had his hand broken by the guards. But if you have everybody, the reason why the solidarity movement eventually helped to overthrow communism in Poland and take down the
mhm,
entire Iron Curtain is because they refused to give up. Thousands gave their lives for that cause.
Yes.
And by and large in Canada, we do not have people who, or have not had people in Canada who've really been willing to do that. And I personally believe it
Mhm.
starts with the church.
I I also believe that. Truthfully, I do believe that. We live in a society of individuals and less about community, and more people are staying inside their homes. They're not venturing outside of their homes. Their social network has now become electronic
Yeah.
as opposed to flesh and blood in person. We don't
Mhm.
assemble. It's really difficult to come together. And what was one of the first places that got the iron fist of the Canadian government was the any form of Christian church. And
Mhm.
my comment isn't not to necessarily make this about one religion being better than the other, and it's not like that. It's just that Christianity has not been getting treated equally uh, versus any of the other religious faiths out there in Canada right now. And as we're seeing with the last I heard, it was 110 different Christian churches across Canada that have either been vandalized or burned to the ground.
Mhm.
And that's at least 110 different crime scenes.
Yeah.
Yet I'm not aware of one single arrest. There might be one person that they were interested in, that all I've ever heard. But
Yeah.
you would think that this is something, because had a mosque or a temple been burned to the ground, they
Mhm.
would have declared the Emergencies Act by now. You know what I mean? And this is the double standard that we're seeing. So when we go back to the days of the lockdowns, you had a church, Tim Coates, Pastor Coates, his church out in Alberta.
Mhm.
The RCMP did a dawn raid on that church, surrounded it with a fence for over 50 days, and guarded it with a private security company.
Mhm. Your
Why?
your
Because,
tax dollars hard at work.
yeah, your tax dollars are at work. Exactly. And yet, Um, they put Tim Coates in jail for 35 days. He was in
Mhm.
solitary confinement or quarantine for COVID for the first 14.
Mhm.
Okay, this is what we're doing. We're putting Christian pastors in prison, or sorry, in remand or into custody, because they won't bow down to these ridiculous, tyrannical violations of people's rights. And even when many of the churches made accommodations and said, "Okay, we'll televise it. Families can come here in their personal vehicles with their families.
Mhm.
It'll be broadcast through the radio, and it'll have a big screen on TV." If you look at Henry Hildebrand in Arm, Elmer, Ontario,
Mm.
uh, over $270,000 worth of fines that they
Yeah.
went after them. You know what's interesting about that too? He offered to pay $10,000 more in fines if, instead of giving it to the government, they could give the money to a charity of their choosing. And the
Mhm.
government turned it down and said, "Absolutely not. We want that money."
Yeah.
And they paid it. They had to pay it. So, we're looking at this double standard. We're looking at this. I think the fear campaign was highly effective for many of the churches that
Mm.
said, I'm not going to be like Coates or Hildebrands. I'm going to just go along to get along. And what was the detrimental effect? Toronto, in the first year of COVID, had a 40% increase in suicides
Yeah.
in Toronto.
Mhm.
Toronto has 2.5 million people in it, with a
Mhm.
40% increase in suicides in the first year of lockdowns.
Mhm.
Where did those people go for comfort, solace? Where? Where could they go?
Yeah.
Nowhere.
So, okay, so we know what the problem is. Now
Mhm,
you have been, I guess, inspired to produce a website and some courses, and
mhm.
one of those courses is what I wanted to talk about. So tell us a little bit about the website.
So I didn't create the website, but I know some of the people who did create the website. So uh, I was a college teacher um, at the beginning of COVID-19. And I had just been hired on in 2019, September, and then 6 months into teaching, and I loved it. I really felt it was my dream job. I was so excited every day to go to work, and of course, I was a part timer. I was always hoping to get full time employment as a college teacher, but you, on average, it takes 2 to 4 years, sometimes even longer, to get hired full time to be in a college system, just
Mhm.
because of the very exploitive nature of that industry. And
Yeah.
so I I was teaching, and 2 years into teaching, um, even though I was teaching from home because I was teaching software and I was teaching from home online, my college and several colleges and universities in Ontario, I believe September 2021 mandated the COVID-19 experimental injection as a
Mhm.
condition of employment.
Yeah.
And so many of us, myself included, lost our jobs because we absolutely fundamentally pushed back and said no. And so as a result, many of the teachers that, or college teachers that lost their jobs, they came together and they created the CCL.
Mhm.
And several months ago, uh, some of those members reached out to me, and I knew a couple of them, and they said, "Look, we have come together as former teachers, and we've put together this website, and we're teaching online courses. Would you like to teach a course?" And initially, I was very excited, and I thought, "Yeah, I could go and teach some software." And then I realized, okay, there's probably 10,000 YouTube channels for free teaching software, so I think I'll take a pass on teaching software.
Mhm.
Same for some of my other disciplines. I've got engineering background. I've got an MBA. I could have taught business, could have taught software. But the one unique thing that I could teach that most people couldn't was emergency preparedness planning. Okay. And let me say this. I spent 25 years as a an officer or a soldier in the Canadian Army. I was an enlisted person in Niagara with the Lincoln and Welland Regiment for about 8.5 years through high
Mhm.
school and college. And then in 1998, I joined the regular force as an officer, as a combat engineer officer. And in my time in the regular force, I did the command and staff college in Kingston. So, my planning education in the military is at a very, very high level. And it's at an operational level, putting thousands of people into a battle space. And so a good friend of mine, he's also a veteran. He had written this line that was done in a video one day, and he said that veterans can no longer be the tip of the spear, but they can be the shield. And so that line always stuck with me.
Mm.
And I'm looking at the turmoil that has happened throughout the world. Not only, natural disasters like we saw with the wildfires in the United States, these floods in the Carolinas, these hurricanes. We're looking at the conflict in Israel, Ukraine, other parts of the Middle East now, and you see the war hawks gearing up to usher in what I believe is World War III. You
Mhm.
look at political unrest in the United States right now. The election is only, I think, 3 days away, and so I'm just looking at all the turmoil in the world, and they're all emergencies.
Yeah.
And I don't have an interest in an emergency preparedness from a perspective of being a doomsday prepper, because I know that has a negative connotation, but it also means we all have car insurance, we have auto insurance. If you're a professional, you have professional liability insurance. We have insurance. And so I view preparedness as a form of insurance.
Mhm.
Okay. And so I put together this course based on a couple of different things. First and foremost, people should understand that this particular course is about planning. It's not a course where I tell people what bag that they should carry or what food they should preserve. It's not that. You can go and get dozens of books on preparedness and watch lots of videos. You can go to Canadian Prepper on his YouTube channel. There's some other great ones in the United States. You can go to that and get, bug out bag information. But that's not what my course is about.
Right.
My course is about specifically learning how to do operational and tactical planning. Okay, and I don't mean tactical as in like I'm going to teach you how to plan a direct action on an infrastructure as a target. I'm not talking about that.
Hmm.
I'm talking about how do you as a family learn how to make your own custom plan based on all of your own personal circumstances. So I've taught sort of very watered down versions of this to people in the past. I've
Hmm.
done some online stuff and I've done in-person training on this methodology.
Yeah.
What people should understand, and this was a big bone of contention I had during the pandemic, was that every single province and territory has an emergency management organization in their province or territory. Every single one of us.
Hmm.
And I've spoken to probably a really well known person in this field now. He's a retired lieutenant colonel, David Redman. David Redman has spoken at the National Citizens Inquiry. He has written letters. He's done many interviews. He was in charge of Alberta emergency management post 9/11.
Okay.
And so he has shared a lot of his information with me on how this was supposed to be done by the government. That's a bit of a different subject, but suffice it to say that every province and territory had contingency plans for a pandemic prior to COVID-19. And all 13 of these organizations were completely benched and sidelined, and nobody ever heard from them. They were not in charge of the pandemic response plan, and they should have been. What's important is all of these organizations, these emergency management organizations, follow the same process that we follow in the military. It's called the operational planning process, or the
Hmm.
OPP. And so I designed my course off of my military training, as well as the information that was shared to me by David Redman, and a lot of other open source information on how to convert what I would have done as a soldier over to you, the individual, and how you would have made a plan given all of your current situation in your circumstances, and made a custom plan for you, written so that if there was an emergency, you would not have to come up with a plan under physical and mental distress.
Right.
It's a contingency plan like we have in the military, like we have in the government. I'm getting you at the end of this course. It's a 4-week course, be about an hour of online content with an additional hour online with me one night a week for like as a group for an additional hour where we go through some of these problems and we talk about how to plan for them.
Hmm.
And so my goal is at the end of the 4 weeks, you have a written plan for you and your family
Hmm.
that in any emergency, you could apply that plan. That's the goal. It's insurance. It's really what it comes down to.
Hmm.
And so I'll give you an example of how we would start off with this. The first week that I in the course is going to be basically your immediate action plan.
Hmm.
In for if you have any military viewers, they would know this sort of terminology. It's basically, your hasty plan. What would you come up with in a real hurry? So we go through that in the first week, and then the next 3 weeks we will cover off your deliberate detailed plan, or your estimate is another term that the military would call it. And so at the end, we come up with a written, almost like a written set of orders for your family, that if this happens, this is what we are going to do. So the reason it's important to have it in a written plan that everybody understands is because let's look at, for example, two summers ago, we had a complete breakdown in communications for one day. I think it was Rogers lost their whole telecommunications system for one day. Couldn't
Yep.
make phone. Well, if this was a prolonged event and you couldn't have communications, you have a written plan that everybody understands. And if you're not co-located with your loved ones, you can all have access to the plan and refer to the plan and execute the plan, even though you can't get communications with the people in your plan. So this is what it accounts for. And so this is where I'm trying to get to the point where under duress, under stress, under fear, which equals a cognitive impairment, you're not trying to come up with this magic plan that's going to save everybody.
Hmm.
You're just going to refer to what you've already planned for and execute your plan. That's what the intent is.
Hmm.
So
Okay.
let me give you an example. Okay.
Yeah.
You could in the first exercise first exercise in the course, I talk about you're a small family of 4, as you can see on the picture. You're a family of 4. You're eating dinner, TV's on in the background, and you get this breaking news bulletin that in 3 days time there's going to be a flood likely in your area, and you have an SUV. And that's really all the scenario is that I give. And then I tell the students, okay, do up a plan. You've got 20 minutes, right? I've done
Hmm.
this with groups. I've done this with groups. What I'm trying to intentionally do when I give you 20 minutes is to introduce a bit of false anxiety,
Hmm.
right? A little bit of fear. And I ask groups to present the plan. And so that also introduces a little bit of nervousness of public speaking. So it's very contrived what I'm doing, but I'm trying to simulate anxiety and fear.
Hmm.
And then I always ask people, okay, present your plan. And more often than not, people assume away most of the problems.
Yeah.
Because I also ask them to state their assumptions and their
Hmm.
constraints. And they typically will go through and assume away most of the problem. And so I teach them a process on how to go through state assumptions, state constraints, and then we go through something called fact, consideration, deduction, task. And once they get to the end of each of those facts, do a consideration of the fact, a deduction from the consideration, and then create a task from all that. They just get a laundry list of items. That's their plan. That's their immediate action plan. Accomplish all those tasks, and you've got a good half decent start to a plan.
Hmm.
So that's what we talk about in the first week. And let me give you one more example. What's a fact? Okay, let's talk about the children. What it would be an assumption? The assumption is none of my children have a medical or none of the people in my family have medical concerns that I have to accommodate. So, for example, is anybody on an IV machine? Is anybody in a wheelchair? Okay.
Right.
I'm stating my assumption that everybody is physically fit enough to easily move from one location to another.
Right.
That's my assumption. Okay. Now, what are my constraints? What's an example of a constraint? A constraint could be right now, I live north of Toronto, so north of Lake Ontario. Okay. My constraint is I'm not going south because I have a massive obstacle in my path. Okay. That is a constraint for me. I cannot go south if I need to escape my area. I must go north or east or west. I cannot go. That's a constraint. I can't
Mm.
go from Toronto to Niagara with Lake Ontario in my path. Okay. And so then when I start to dig deeper into that, those start to become facts. Okay. That's a fact now for me that I cannot go south. Right. So then when I start to look at the facts, then I can make considerations and deductions and tasks. Okay. And this is how I break down the problem so that each and every one of those tasks that I have to perform to get ready, they're very lean, they're fat free, and there's no fluff. Okay. And that's how I create my plan. And
Mm.
then I just have to execute that plan. Break it down into those little steps. Don't just use rectal planning. That's you don't do that. You actually go through the facts, considerations, deductions, and you create tasks, and then you execute those tasks. That's your plan.
Mm.
So the course is 4 weeks. That's really the basics of the first week, and then after that, we get into some really good detailed planning, long-term planning.
Okay.
It's not about, the course is not going to be about, how do I create interlocking fields of fire with my machine guns? Okay. It's none of that. I don't talk about warfare. I don't talk about combat. I don't. But the principles of planning are identical. And
Hmm.
that's what it's for. So you could be in a high-rise apartment in Toronto. You live on the 50th floor of one of these beehives in Toronto, or you could live on 100 acres of rural property, on in an unorganized township, right?
Hmm.
Everybody's circumstance is different. So I
Right.
can't go writing a plan for everybody. What I can do is teach you how to understand what are your factors that you have to do an analysis on and create a
Hmm.
plan for your own circumstance. So that's what I'm trying to teach is those skills over 4 weeks.
Very, very important. So, what is the cost of the course?
So the course is $230 for the 4 weeks.
Mm,
That covers the 4 weeks, and the exercises, obviously everything. I
mhm.
don't grade. I'm not going to grade the work. You reality is going to grade your work and
Yeah.
how effective your plan is. And I do have a cost to the website and to the CCL for marketing and all that kind of stuff. So it's not, I'm not making $230 of profit off people. I have to share that cost to other people.
Right. Wow. Um, One of the things that I think the the trucker convoy really highlighted to us, and the whole pandemic, was that we don't know how to deal with conflict. We don't know how to deal with emergencies. Um,
Mhm.
it's been so good for so long in North America. We've forgotten how to deal with any kind of adversity. We just expect that Walmart is going to have the stores, the
Mhm.
shelves stocked, and you're always going to be able to charge up your Tesla. And
Mhm. Yeah.
um, yeah, it's and so you know during the Great Depression, I think there was 7 million people that starved to death,
Mhm.
and they knew how to do canning and things like that, preserves a lot better now. Can you
Mhm.
imagine if we
Oh yeah.
have a situation like what's going on in North Carolina, in Toronto?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
another Hurricane Hazel, let's say, for
Mm.
instance, where we had, what
Mhm.
I think it was, how many people was it that died in Hazel? Was it 60 or something like that from the flooding?
Yeah, it was far too many, especially since, a lot of that flooding happened in areas never thought to have ever experienced a flood.
Yeah.
In no recorded history in some of those floods, people had never heard of a flood ever happening in those areas.
Hmm. Yeah.
In
So,
a lot of our infrastructure that we design to is, there is always an account of the types of emergencies that you could have to experience. So
mhm,
sewer lines and storm sewer drains and stuff, they're all based off of 50 or 100-year storms. And that means, what is the worst storm we've ever seen in 100 years?
mm,
That volume of water is what we're going to design it to. So you could imagine what the designs were for the Americans in those regions who have never experienced storms of that type. That's why you're seeing roads being completely washed away, because they weren't designed to that type of event.
well, how do you have flooding 2,500 feet up in the mountains if it's
Yes,
not engineered? I mean,
I know.
that doesn't happen naturally.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't.
So we're dealing with the situation now where they're openly, and you've got the the wildfires that hit Canada last year. I mean, we're using dews, we have HARP, we have
Mhm.
all of this different technology, and the governments of the world, who are simply puppets to the globalists, have openly declared war against us.
Yes.
And the U.S. election is on Tuesday. I don't know. if the US is going to make it to the election. And if they do, what is going to come out of that? They're going to try to steal this once again. I
Mhm.
don't know if they're going to have the capacity to do so, but their objective has always been civil war anyway, regardless. They're
Mhm.
either, going to keep putting these policies in place and bring about a communist dictatorship in the US. So, because look, I mean, Venezuela, I mean, Maduro
Mhm.
lost by 50%, and
Mhm.
somehow or another, he's still in power. Bolsonaro in Brazil, he won that election in a landslide. He's the Brazilian version of Donald Trump,
Mhm.
and the globalists took over that too. So what you're talking about right now is we all need to make sure that we have a plan in place,
Mhm. Yes.
because for all of the listeners here, they all believe the Bible, they all trust the Lord, but you look at the book of Revelation and bad things are coming, and
Mhm.
we're going to be here for it.
Yes.
So
And this system that we use, this system of planning that we use in the military, this operational planning process, we can scale it. You
mm,
know, we use it at an operational level. So there's three levels within, military doctrinal strategy. There's the strategic level at the national level. There's the operational level, which is what I'm trained to. But there's the tactical level. And the tactical level is where all of the in a military context, let's say that's where all the fighting and dying happens at the tactical level.
yeah.
But you can implement these same planning principles at the tactical, operational, strategic level. So, for example, what does that mean to somebody who would take my course? They could use this process and go through and build out a tactical level plan for themselves and their family. They could look at this and say, okay, I need to analyze my geographic region. Like, what is going to happen with my city or the area that I live in or the county? What is this going to mean for my province? If I start using these principles, this method of thinking, and apply these same principles, you can start to make deductions based off of how you see things unfolding. And deductions, sometimes can be, sometimes, not every time, can be sort of a form of prediction.
Mm,
Okay. And that's really what you're trying to do. You're trying to predict certain things from happening and saying, okay, if this does happen, this is what my response to that is going to be. Okay.
mhm,
So we do in this course, we'll do this wargaming phase. We're going to select a certain course of action.
mhm,
And based on the three different courses of action, in emergency preparedness, your courses of action really are bug in or stay there, don't evacuate, evacuate, or the mix in between the two is monitor with a view to possibly evacuating. Okay, so that's
mm,
basically your three. Think of this in terms of a forest fire. You
mm,
know, I'm going to leave immediately, or I'm going to monitor the situation with a view to leaving, or no, I think I can stay. Okay, so this is really those are your three primary courses of action that you would be taking. Now, at some
mm,
point in the core or in the scenario, you select that one course of action, and it's not just a gut feeling, although that's important. It's going to be based on a certain criteria, and we're going to rate the criteria. We're actually going to rate it, red, yellow, green in terms
mhm,
of we're going to score it and to say, okay, objectively, this course of action meets our needs. Once you select that course of action, then we're going to war game it.
mm,
And the reason you war game it is to find holes in your plan and give you this sort of if then capability. So you'll break it down into certain time frames or belts of activity. One is getting here, like getting out. Let's say one of the one of the phases of your evacuation is just getting out of the GTA. Like, could you imagine what it would be like trying to evacuate the GTA on a mass scale, 2.5 million people trying to get on the 401. Listen, I drive on the 401 almost, a couple times a week. And under normal circumstances, it for me to go downtown from where I am in Brampton, to go, I think Friday I went to Brampton was 27 kilometers where I had to go. Still took me 45 minutes.
Mhm.
And most of my driving was on the highway, right? Imagine doing this in an emergency.
I used
Okay.
to live up in Vaughan at
Yes.
Peel and
Mhm.
Rutherford. I
Yeah, I
was
know the area.
right by Vaughan Mills Mall there,
Mhm.
and I was maybe 2 kilometers from
Mhm.
Highway 400. There were days it would take me 20 minutes to get to the highway.
Yes.
Two
Yes.
kilometers.
Yes.
10
So
minutes to
if you're
kilometer.
yeah, if you've ever been in the downtown of Toronto, anywhere near any of the hospitals, like the General or Sick Kids or Mount Sinai, if you've ever been there and you've
Yeah,
tried to get south to the Gardner,
yeah,
it can take an hour just to get a kilometer down the road,
yeah,
right? And that's normal rush hour traffic. Imagine an emergency.
yeah,
You're not moving. You're so we talk about that stuff.
yeah.
But this one last thing I do want to say, which is really important about the concept of having a pre-written plan.
Mm,
There's a great book out there. I don't think I have a copy near me, but it's written by Lieutenant. He's retired. He was a psychologist. He's wrote two great books. One is called On Killing and On Combat.
mhm,
David Grossman. He is a former U.S. Army Ranger turned psychologist, and he's written extensively about what does it mean to try to function when you're terrified.
mm.
Okay,
Yes.
so you can increase your heart rate through a hormonal induced or fear induced heart rate, or you increase your heart rate through cardiovascular activity. Very, very different outcomes for you. But your heart rate is up, but very, very different things physiologically are happening to your body. But the key takeaway is after 10 seconds, your body under a fear induced heart rate will start to lose fine motor control. And then immediately after that, it goes to work on diminishing your gross motor control. So if anyone ever thinks about the time you've been in an emergency, you've had to call 911, how difficult it was for you to just pick up the phone and dial three numbers, 911. People have great difficulty under extreme fear induced heart rates of controlling their bodies.
Mhm,
Do you want to be trying to make a decision when you are now experiencing, your heart rate has gone up to 145 beats per minute? You're full of adrenaline. You're experiencing something called vasoconstriction, where the blood is starting to pool into your brain and into your critical arteries and organs, where your legs feel weak. You're feeling of this shortness of breath. You're trying to make cognitive decisions when you're terrified. It's
mhm,
extremely difficult, which is why race car drivers, airline pilots, and special forces people train to a high level where they're constantly under fear and they're raising their baseline of fear so that
mhm,
they can perform in real emergencies. And so the counter to that is to have a written plan that you've already considered. You don't make it up. And I'll give you a great example. Think of anybody who watches Star Trek or, these movies where, let's say, Star Trek, Picard is surrounded by a whole fleet of Romulans and his shields are down and he's got no phasers. And because of great writing, he comes
mhm.
up with this magic plan to save the day,
Yeah.
right? When he's terrified, as if though he's somehow not feeling the physiological effects of a fear induced heart rate. He just
Mhm,
comes up with the Picard maneuver and saves everybody. Okay, that's not reality. That's not how we do that in the military. That's not how we plan. We pre-consider all of the possibilities, and we set up a series of indicators to tell us what the enemy is doing. And if the enemy is doing something, we've already considered what the response was going to be from us, and we just execute that plan. The commander just makes a decision based on what he's already determined what the most likely and the most dangerous outcome could be to our forces. And this is what I'm going to teach in this course. That's the point.
So we got about 1 or 2 minutes left.
Sure.
How do we register for the course? Do we email you? I've put the link for the course down on in the comments section, so you copy that. And I encourage everybody who's watching, forward this on to other people. I'd love to see a bunch of people register for this course. I think what Tom has to offer is so needed. Tom and I had a great discussion about how the Lord calls people and uses them in the experiences they've already had. And I believe God has got his hands on Tom right now to use him for these end times to help rescue a lot of people. And I think this is a big part of it. So how do we register?
So the link that you just shared on the CCL, that course there has a registration button on there. There is one on the website for registering for courses. So you can go on through the CCL and register for the course.
Okay.
I'd love it if people registered, but unfortunately at the moment, I've got one person registered for the course and it's supposed to start on the 6th. So in a couple of days, but I've postponed it once already, despite, posting it on social media. I know the CCL's advertising it, but I'm not getting a lot of traction. I understand that, but it's available to the public. I hope the public participates in it. The feedback I've always gotten was great from other people I've trained.
We're going to see what we can do to get the word out. Tom,
all right.
Come to the end of our hour. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been great. I'm sure people have been inspired and blessed by this, and we look forward to seeing what's going to happen out of this course. So,
okay, thank you.
Want to thank everybody for joining us once again for the Threshing Floor. Make sure you like and share this, and we'll look forward to seeing everybody next week right here on lamnetwork.tv. Shavua Tov. Have a great week, everyone.
Thank you.
I won't run from the crushing. I'll hold on through the pain. What I lose means nothing.
If you missed today's show or want to watch it again, or want to tell someone where they can watch this episode, go to lamnetwork.tv, where you can find this show and all the other live Lamb Show archives in the on-demand section of the website. Thank you for watching, and don't forget to tell someone about the Messianic Lamb Network.
I just wanna be your sanctuary, a dwelling place for grace and mercy. Keep sifting me till everything is on the threshing floor.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussions, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take a tour of the lamnetwork.tv website. I'm Darryl Weinberg, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.
How can I ever complain? Forgive me, Lord. I just wanna be your sanctuary, a dwelling place for grace and mercy. Keep sifting me till everything is on the threshing floor. Let it fall on the threshing floor. Everything that's between you and me, Lord.